Hi and welcome to Terry Talks Movies. This time around, in the second to last video of the year, I'm going to talk about a couple of small genre movies. One's kind of science fiction, kind of horror. The other one, dead on science fiction. But they're small films, not big ones. They cost about $20 million each then. Really not going to get a lot of love and a lot of attention, a lot of publicity, because the big guys suck all of that energy out of the market. But I thought I would talk about them because they're both interesting. I think they do well, given that they're small films. And the subject matter is not entirely unfamiliar to us. But within that restriction, they are honest dealers with the audience. And I think that's so incredibly important. This year, we've had a lot of movies that have been dishonest with the audience. We've had dumb shit like Madam Web. We've also had Kraven the Hunter, which would have been a really great superhero movie in 2005. But in 2024, it felt old-fashioned and dated, and we'd seen it all before. Things like Alien Romulus, which I have not seen, but from everything I've talked to people about, it's pretty much a greatest hits version of Alien, which I was never in love with anyway. For me, Alien was always a haunted house movie set on a spaceship. I'm in a headspace at the moment where I'm more in love with smaller films, little ones that do well. And so I'm going to talk about these two movies. One is a werewolf kind of science fiction-ish movie called Werewolves. See, nice simple title. And the second one is a Canadian science fiction movie, which people will say owes a little bit to The Matrix, called Levels. But we're going to talk about Werewolves first because it's got the most machine guns in it. Directed by Stephen C. Miller, it's got a really nice premise to it. Stars Frank Grillo, Katarina Law, and Ulfnesh Hedera. Story is in the trailer, so I'm not doing any spoilers here. A year before, there's been a weird supermoon. And that supermoon's triggered genetic changes in human beings while the supermoon's there. About 1 billion people turned into werewolves. This led to some distress. If you get hit by the moonlight, you're going to get big and hairy and clawy and have poor impulse control. So this happened a year ago. Frank Grillo plays a molecular biologist who's ex-army, whose brother was a first responder and who died a year ago. He's now looking after his niece, and he's setting up their house so that they can survive this supermoon that's only going to happen one night. Being a molecular biologist, Wesley, the Frank Grillo character, is trying to find a way to block the rays of the moon, turning people into enormous, jacked up Lon Chaney Juniors. They have a thing called moon screen, which they think is going to block that, as well as eye drops, which will block the rays of the moon, turning people into werewolves. So pretty much everybody on the planet is barricading themselves into their house. It's like the Purge with fur, but it doesn't have as much political subtext as the Purge has. Now, I've got to say, Frank Grillo, I admire as an actor. I like what he does. He does the physical stuff as well, too. For a 59-year-old guy, he is jacked as hell, and he can carry character beats better than a lot of other action stars can. So Wesley goes to the lab where they're working, which is run by a scientist played by Lou Diamond Phillips. And they're going to test the moon screen on 3 people who have volunteered to be locked up in cages, to be exposed to the moonlight, and they'll just see whether the treatment works. Meanwhile, his niece and his sister-in-law are barricading the house. He set them up pretty well. They've got big high fencing with electricity running through it, nails on the roof. They've got security cameras. They've got steel gates and steel window bars everywhere. They're really set up well for this. And he's also got this really cool thing where he's got a 44-gallon drum of capsaicin, basically pepper spray, and it's hooked up to a lawn sprinkler. So at the press of a button, it'll lawn sprinkle pepper spray at the werewolves. I like that. It's a nice idea. It's a great concept. So they start things out. The moon rises. They open the retractable roof of the lab where the 3 subjects are, and the moon screen works for about an hour. Then it doesn't. Things go wrong. They break out. The lab is compromised, and Wesley has to try to get back to his family to rescue them from the surrounding hordes of werewolves. His gung-ho next-door neighbor, who's a gun nut, succumbs to the moon and becomes one of the main antagonists in this. He and a female scientist, played by Katrina Law, head back to where his family is to try to protect them. Amy, the other scientist, is an expert on wolf psychology, so she knows how they're going to act when the werewolves start getting a bit rowdy. So they've got to get across the city back to the house and protect the family because they're the only people he has left. This one runs a really lean 94 minutes. It doesn't outstay its welcome. It doesn't try to do anything on an epically grand scale. It's all down to the scale of city blocks. And it looks good. The movie also has the virtue of combining some CGI, but mostly with practical makeup effects. All the werewolves are practical effects except when they're transforming. And that's kind of neat as well. I like that. They're a little bit like the Howling kind of werewolves. Big, lean, long faces, all that kind of stuff. And even though a movie like this can feel very retro, it's got a good initial concept. The idea of you go out in the moon, you're going to turn into a werewolf. Doesn't matter whether you're bitten by a werewolf or not. If you're a human being and the moonlight hits you, you're going to get hairy. Amy and Wesley have to keep reapplying the spray that stops the moon from turning them into werewolves. And they've also got to dodge a city full of werewolves. There's a really good tense scene where they take refuge in a bodega and they accidentally stumble upon a child werewolf. A kid's been turned into a werewolf. And there's that moral conflict of, do you shoot a child in the head because it's turned into a werewolf? How do you handle that? And Wesley, being a decent man, pauses and hesitates. And that's kind of interesting too. That awareness that there's still humanity behind the werewolves is one of the things that restricts the heroes from fulfilling their mission at times. It's got a nice ending. The werewolves are really well done. The acting is all on point. There's not a bad piece of acting in this movie. And it is incredibly entertaining. You don't go in there with expecting it to be a classic. You don't expect it to be the best movie of the year in any way at all. But it does talk about that siege mentality that a lot of Americans have to their friends and neighbors and fellow citizens. Let's fortify our houses and have lots of guns around. That kind of thing is challenged a bit by this movie. Ultimately, it doesn't do any good to have all those guns. Best thing you can do is fortify your house and hunker down and stay as quiet as possible. I really enjoy this one. The makeup effects are good. The acting's good. The script is really good. And there's a really nice bit at the end where it isn't Wesley who ultimately prevails. It's actually his sister-in-law, Lucy, who saves everybody pretty much. Good on a small budget, small scale, big idea, science fiction / horror movie. There's a bit of gore and guts in it because you need that. You can't really have it off screen. But they don't overplay it. There's not endless fountains of blood and arterial spray around. And I think with genre films, that's where movies are actually at their best at the moment. The really big ones, the Alien Romuluses and all that, yeah, they're going to make money. But in a year's time, you're not going to remember them. But I like a small, chewy science fiction / horror film that is honest with the audience, does everything it says it's going to do, brings some points of originality to the script and to the film itself, and leaves you satisfied in the end. And you go, yes, these characters have earned what happens at the end. They've earned their survival. And that's kind of cool. So Werewolves is a recommend from me. Oddly enough, ignore all of the reviews you see on IMDB, because I'm finding even when a movie is good, small films on IMDB are getting a lot of people just laying shit on them in a totally unjustified way. I don't know whether some of that is weaponized by other studios or by people who have an interest in downplaying the recommendations of certain films, but it seems a bit dishonest in some way to me. I looked at reviews of both of these movies that I'm reviewing. They're either people who are just edgelords, and there's always those, we get those in the comments on this channel, or else they're people who seem to have a purpose for saying a movie's bad when it actually isn't. Keep that in mind if you look at any reviews on IMDb, because I think there are some bad actors who are putting reviews on that platform, which is a total shame because this movie is a nice, solid, fun, 94-minute science fiction horror movie where a lot of people get chewed up. So that's the first recommendation. Second one's a Canadian science fiction movie, directed and written by Adam Stern, who has spent about 25 years doing digital special effects for films. This is his first feature film. He's done 2 short films as a director. This is his first feature film, and it's a thing called Levels. Even though there are a couple of qualities about it I don't particularly like, I'm going to recommend it to you. In this one, a guy called Joe runs a bookshop in a slightly interesting and textured future. And bookstores aren't a big thing. People mostly read things digitally. And he's running his bookstore one day, and a woman walks in, a woman called Ash, played by Cara G, who played drummer in The Expanse. She's an Ojibwe Canadian actress, and they kind of do a meet cute. She invites him out for coffee, and they fall in love. And they meet up on a date soon afterwards, and a man walks up and shoots her in the head. Joe goes into a depression then. He doesn't leave his apartment for any reason. He's really having a bad time. Then he receives an email from Dash saying there's a book being delivered to your bookstore. You need to keep that, bring it back to your apartment. I'll tell you what to do with it then. And it turns out that Ash isn't really dead and that there are multiple worlds. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail about these multiple worlds, but Joe and Ash end up fighting an oligarch who is running a lot of the technology that manifests alternate worlds. He's a guy called Hunter, played by Aaron Abrams, and he's a nasty piece of work. He's a sociopath. They start getting assistance from a news vendor who runs a newsstand in the city, a guy called Oliver, played by David Hewlett. Really well-known actor in Canadian science fiction circles. He was in various Stargate things. He was in a whole bunch of different science fiction related projects, and Oliver helps them stop Hunter from destroying the world. There's a lot that's really interesting in this film. It's got an incredibly vivid visual style. There are paid mercenaries who have masks on that stop something being identified by security cameras. There's AI personal assistants that run apartments. There's all sorts of little bits and pieces in this world that makes it feel really textured and interesting. The special effects are not always state-of-the-art, but they're honest and they are effective in what they do. And the relationship between the two main characters, Joe and Ash, really lands, except for the fact that Peter Mooney, who plays Joe, doesn't have the presence that the role requires. I mean, he's not a bad actor. I'm not saying that at all, but he's a kind of second tier kind of actor. He can't carry a movie. And he does look a lot like Jimmy Fallon, which doesn't help at all. Cara G is really good in this film. She does have the presence to carry a movie, and she does a good job playing Ash, though she is less of a main character than Joe is. But toward the end of the film, it's her and Oliver, played by David Hewlett, who carry most of the emotional heavy lifting of the movie. And the movie looks good. It's filmed in Winnipeg in winter. It has that kind of slightly teal and orange look that makes it feel slightly dated. So the color values are slightly skewed, but they're skewed to a purpose. There's some good, effective, small-scale fight scenes in this. I want to tell you more about the film, but I don't want to spoil the film. I think at a level, it's an honest dealer with the audience again. It does what it does. It's got a little bit of... You can make the comparisons to The Matrix, but I think it's lazy to do that. I think you get more out of this film by letting it be something of itself. And the ideas the movie has are parallel to, but not exactly the same as in The Matrix. They're more like a movie I saw this year called Discontinued. But again, I'm veering a little close to spoilers here, and I don't want to do that. I like the film. I think it's an honest little film. And as I said last week, it's one of those films that avoids dystopia, and a relationship between two people is at the core of the movie. Even though it does have a lot of action scenes and it does have a lot of bad guys with guns and knives and all sorts of things like that, the core of it is relationships between not only Ash and Joe, but between Joe and Oliver and Ash and Oliver, and what Oliver's actual motives are. In one way, the movie is very cosmic in scale, and particularly at the end, when the plot resolves itself, it does become quite a cosmic conundrum for the characters in the film. But it keeps things at street level and keeps things at the level of the characters that we have. It doesn't need to go global to suggest global. And there's also a cute little note which suggests that one of the alternate worlds in the movie is actually our world. So there's a little bit of a tweak there as well. I enjoyed this movie. I didn't enjoy it as much as Discontinued, which is very much drilled down to one person. But I did enjoy it. I think Canada's doing some really nice second-tier films, which are obviously intended to make their money on streaming services. And that's It's a perfectly legitimate aim for a movie. Not everything has to be in hardtop cinemas all the time and spend weeks there and get a lot of buzz and get Oscar buzz and get award buzz and things like that. Sometimes making a good, honest science fiction movie that's intended to sit on a streaming platform for a year or two is a good business model. And this one has that. I recommend Levels. I recommend Werewolves. Come to think of it, they're both plurals, aren't they? One-word titles with plurals. And I like them better than like a lot of the bigger scale action films you get on platforms like Netflix and Amazon Prime. Stuff like Heart of Stone with Gal Gadot and Red One. These movies have an integrity and an honesty about them that those larger, cynical exercises that have a lot of big name stars that have big action sequences and events, but essentially they're empty and they're same with a whole bunch of previous films. Werewolves and Levels have a space of their own in the genres in which they're made. And that, for me, gets a lot of respect. So that's what I got for you this time around. 2 lower budget, smaller scale science fiction / genre films, which entertain and deliver full value for what you invest in them. So thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. You can support the channel by becoming a channel member or else by becoming a patron at patreon.com/TerryTalksMovies. Next up, we've got the big end of the year, the New Year's Eve live stream from 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. Australian time. And that one's already been scheduled, so you'll see if you're subscribed. You'll already see that one on your list of my videos. And I'm going to have a lot of fun with that. I always enjoy the live streams at New Year's Eve. This is going to be the third one in a row. And I hope to have a lot of good stuff for that. So until then, watch some good movies, watch some bad movies, watch some smaller films and just enjoy them for exactly what they are. And I'll catch you next time.